Hi guys, Grand J here. Hope you guys had a great Christmas and a happy New Year's. It's 2018 and it's the first video of the year, so I've got something really fun to show you guys. So, today's video we'll be talking about the new Ice Lightning Final Fantasy XIII deck that I've built. I called it Lightning Returns. So, this deck is all about the new Legendary Lightning from Opus 4. It's a 5-cost forward and it's got the ability to just push through games, and so this is what the deck is built around. Here's a deck list on screen right now for you guys who just want to try it out and get straight into playing. But in terms of the general strategy, the deck really sort of revolves around having free backups. So you really want to build free backups. You want to respond to your opponent's threats with your forwards. Stuff like I'll Sid Onion Knight, Rigdia, Sid Reigns. Get some forwards down, and then this allows you to use Legendary Lightning to come in, clear path through for your forwards, and then just basically attack your opponent for game. And then basically, if the game does draw out longer than that, you have plenty of cards that can punish your opponent for having dull forwards. So let's look at a card-by-card analysis. First of all, let's look at the forwards. So first of all, the quintessential part of the deck, we have 3 copies of new Legendary Lightning. So it's a 5-cost forward at 7,000 power, so it is below curve. It does have haste though, but when Lightning enters the field or attacks, choose one forward your opponent controls. If you control a category 13 character other than Lightning, dull it. So this does include backups and monsters as well. And if you do consider the fact that it does include your backups, we're going to be able to trigger this condition almost every single time we play Lightning. In addition to this, it's also got another ability called discard 1 card named Lightning, remove Lightning from the game, then play Lightning back onto the field dull. So it's in effect a special ability, but it's not described as a special ability. But what this effectively allows Lightning to do is allows her to remove herself from the game, put her back in the field. This has a couple of different relevant effects. So one is that it removes any damage from her. So basically any situation where you do use this ability, Lightning comes back as a new forward, right? So any sort of buffs and debuffs that's on her have been removed. Any sort of combat damage or any damage she's received for a turn is all refreshed. In addition to this, she also gets to trigger any enter play abilities, such as her ability of dulling a forward when she enters play, and also any summons or abilities that are on the stack that are targeting her, they sort of fizzle out as well because she's no longer the same forward. They're no longer targeting her. They just kind of get wasted. So basically this gives us a really strong aggressive forward that can lock down a lot of our opponent's forwards, attack aggressively because it's got haste, and it's extremely difficult to deal with because of its ability to just dodge out of abilities. This card's stupidly strong. On the turn that you play it, if you do control a Final Fantasy XIII character, you're going to be able to dull a 4 when she comes into play and dull a 1 when she attacks. So basically this allows you to very easily clear out dull 2 of your opponent's forwards, and this opens up pretty much a whole opening for all your forwards to attack through. The fact that she's got haste is great as well, which means that she's just going to be able to put so much pressure on your opponent. If you have 2 or 3 forwards down from playing Ousted, Onion Knight, that sort of stuff, and even though your opponent's trying to play bigger forwards to try to stop them, if you play a Lightning down, you can clear through their forwards and just rush them through. The secondary ability is actually stupidly good as well. It means that your opponent has a really, really difficult time getting rid of your Lightning. After this Lightning down on the field, your opponent's going to find it very difficult to deal with her, simply because she's able to get through most defenders, most blockers, and also she's got the ability to just dodge abilities. Not only that, her effect can also be used defensively as well. So if during your opponent's turn you want to stop one of your opponent's attacks, you can always use the ability to remove Lightning, put her back into play, and dull one of your opponent's forward. So this card has both offensive and defensive values, and it's just an extremely high tempo, high speed card. So next, we're playing 1 copy of 4-cost Lightning from Opus 1. It is haste. When Lightning enters the field, choose one forward your opponent controls and dull it. It's got 4,000 power, so yes, it is below curve. But again, we're playing this for a very similar reason that we're playing the previous Lightning. It is a smaller, cheaper variant of that. It's an aggressive card. It's got haste, and it dulls one of your opponent's forwards as well. So basically, this allows us in certain situations to basically in a top decking situation, and we don't happen to have the other Lightning on board, play this Lightning down to create an opening for your opponent and attack. So Lightning's value in this game is, or especially in this deck, is very much to open your opponent up and to be able to attack. So she applies 2 types of pressure. She applies aggressive damage pressure, but she also opens your opponent up, and she's really good with this. The reason why we're playing 1 copy of her is that she is a valuable devout target. So in certain situations, especially towards the later game when you may not have enough resources to play Genesis or something with devout, playing Lightning with devout allows you to open your opponent up and deal damage. So basically it can be used slightly more advantageously than Devouring Genesis would be in certain parts of the later game when you don't have those sort of resources to make it all happen. In addition, it's also a lightning card, so we can search for her using like Mog 13, and also if we don't need to play this lightning, we can always discard her for our legendary lightning's effect as well. Next, we have one copy of Opus 1 Legendary Lightning. So this might seem a little bit weird because this card hasn't really seen all too much play in like pretty much in the last 6 months at all. And there's a good reason why we're playing this lightning. So first of all, it is another lightning, so we can use it for our first legendary lightning's ability. So that's first reason. In addition to this deck is running free Odins, and the reason why we're running free Odins is because there's so many cards in the current metagame that are just really strong right now, and they're all like around 4 or less, and there are a lot of them give this deck trouble. So cards such as Dadaluma, cards such as the Emperor, cards such as Trey, such as Ranger. There are a lot of things in the metagame that just happen to be popping up that can give this deck trouble because they can't be chosen by your abilities, or they lock down your abilities, or they have some sort of like effect that really sort of penalizes for dulling them as well. And not to mention Gaia in certain Earth decks as well. So Odin is really quite good in the metagame at the moment, and specifically Odin deals with the problems that the other cards in the deck can't run. So that's why I'm running free copies of this. So in certain situations where you do need an Odin to get over, say, your opponent's Gaia, you can always use Monk 13 to search for this lightning, and then play her down, grab an Odin, and then like use it to open your opponent up. In addition to this card also has like the ability to use an S ability where until the end of the turn, when lightning gains haste and first strike, and when lightning attacks, you can choose one of your opponent's forwards that must block this attack if possible. So yeah, lightning also has can also be played as a respectable forward as well, and can be used as a sort of pseudo removal type as an S ability as well. So she's not bad within her own right as well. Next, we have free Alcid, the quintessential lightning card. It's a 4-cost 6,000 power, comes into play, deals 6,000 damage, and you play a free cost forward. So everyone knows about this card. It's one of it's probably the most notorious lightning cards in the game right now. So we're running 3 copies of this. We have 3 copies of Onion Knight. We got 2 copies of Rigdia. So this card is going to be obviously very strong. We play him because it allows us to develop 2 forwards while getting rid of one of our opponent's strong forwards. And this is really good for this deck because after we have the Alcid Onion Knight down or the Alcid Rigdia down, we can then use Lightning to get through their next blocker, and then we can just swing through with 2 or 3 attacks in one turn. And that's why Alcid works particularly well in this deck, because we get 2 forwards for a very cheap cost, and we're moving one of our opponent's forwards through from the game as well. Next, 3 copies of Onion Knight. So of course, if you're playing Alcid, then Onion Knight is the obvious pairing with that. It's 3 cost, 6,000 power, so it's below curve, but it deals 5,000 damage to a damage forward when it comes into play. Not only is it good with Alcid, but it's also got relevance with Rigdia, so you can play Rigdia and then you can follow up with Onion Knight. And also this deck runs 2 copies of Sid Reigns, which is a fantastic card. Sometimes Sid Reigns just doesn't have enough punch to get over to finish off a forward. But yeah, Sid Reigns, when it comes to play, deals 4,000 damage to a guy. Onion Knight can then follow up and kill forwards off, and then you get the trigger of Sid Reigns as well. So Onion Knight has multiple uses, not just an Alcid pairing, but it's also great with Rigdia and Sid Reigns. And in certain situations where you do lose a combat due to a combat trick or something, Onion Knight can come in during the second main phase to finish them off. Next, we have 2 copies of Rigdia. So this is basically a smaller Onion Knight that has a similar type ability. When it comes to play, you can choose an active forward, deal it 3,000 damage. When that forward is put from the field in the break zone, choose on forward your opponent controls and dull it. So this has a secondary ability of being able to dull a secondary forward. So if you have a Rigdia and you play an Onion Knight, or if you had an Alcid and you play a Rigdia with it, you can destroy one of your opponent's forwards, and then Rigdia's effect triggers off, allows you to dull another forward, which again opens your opponent up. So this card is able to deal damage as well as open your opponent up to allow your guys to attack. So this deck is very much playing 2 or 3 guys and then just opening your opponent's defense up every single turn and attacking with your opponent directly, and you're able to push through the game within about 3 or 4 turns very quickly after you get some sort of board presence. Not only that, this card also has can also be used with cards like Black Mage. So Black Mage, yeah. Pay 2 lightning, dull it, break it, choose 1 damage forward, break it. So yeah, again, this card by itself can pair up with some of your backups to also just be able to remove a forward and trigger its ability. Not to mention, it's also a Final Fantasy 13 character as well, and there's a reason why this is going to be relevant a little bit later on. So yeah, it doesn't really matter for Legendary Lightning all too much, because we're going to have 13 backups. FF13 backups onto the field, so we're not going to have to rely on forwards. But when we do talk about Sarah, Rigdia is another Final Fantasy 13 card that can help us trigger off her ability. So, talking about Sarah, she is one of the new heroic cards from this set. It's a 2-cost forward at 5,000 power. When Sarah enters the field, choose one forward your opponent controls. If you control a category 13 forward other than Sarah, dull and freeze it. When Sarah attacks, you may pay 2 ice. If you do so, your opponent discards 1 card from his or her hand. So, this card basically is a smaller, cheaper, more conditional version of Genesis. It's a 2 for 5, so that's on curve. But its ability to come in and dull and freeze a forward is really quite strong, and it's like it's half the cost of Genesis, and its power is not significantly lower, although it does have the condition of you have to have a category 13 forward with it. Now this is actually quite easy to trigger off considering we have so many. We have Sid Reigns, Rigdia, Sarah, Lightning, and we have Swamp Monks as well if we do need to. So this does allow us the ability to like dull and freeze a forward for a very, very cheap cost, and also it just gives us another way to dull and freeze a forward if we have Genesis already on the field. Not to mention her second ability in certain situations, especially if you're kind of ahead, or if you're in a situation where you're trying to sort of lock your opponent down, you can always pay 2 extra ice to make your opponent discard a card. So there is an additional sort of secondary value with that as well. Not to mention, so people always like sort of respond by saying, oh yeah, like if you play Sarah and your opponent uses some sort of ability to respond to remove one of your Final Fantasy XIII characters, in response you don't get the effect. Yes and no, like, so yeah, definitely, like, if they do, then you don't get this effect, but most of the times, like, you'll have a Sid Reigns or you have a Rigdia on the field, and does your opponent really want to spend, like, a removal spell or a removal summon to remove, like, one of your 2-cost forwards that's already had its value come into play? Not only that, Legendary Lightning is probably the card that you're going to be pairing up with Sarah the most, simply because, like I said, Legendary Lightning is so versatile and so difficult to kill. So if your opponent does want to use some sort of nuke spell like a Brynhilda or a Bahamut or something like that to try to kill Lightning, you can always like threaten to be able to use Lightning's ability to remove from play and send it back into play. So in effect, you can still get the dull and freeze effect, and you sort of dodge one of your opponent's summons and burn a whole bunch of resources by using your legendary to dodge out of that summon as well. So yeah, so this like new like FF13 combo really sort of works well together because Lightning is a really hard to hit target and Sarah just needs another card to pair up with it, and they make a great combination with each other. Next, we got 2 copies of Sid Reigns. So it's been a very strong card in Final Fantasy XIII for a very long time. Ice decks have always run like 1 or 2 copies of it, and its effect is so good. It's 2-cost forward at 5,000 power. When Sid Reigns enters the field, choose 1 dull forward your opponent controls, deal it 4,000 damage. When it's put from the field in break zone this turn, your opponent discards 1 card from his or her hand. So yeah, so this card is great. It can be paired up with either Black Mage or Onion Knight to just like break the forwards that Sid Reigns chooses. Not to mention there are kind of certain forwards in the metagame that are around that 3,000, 4,000 power, and Sid Reigns can punish them, especially if your opponent is playing like one of the aggressive Shulk decks. So like the Ice Fire Shulk decks sometimes play 2-cost Tifa that hastes in, and Sid Reigns is a great punish for that. So yeah, Sid Reigns is just a great way to punish your opponent for aggroing in on you, and certain times, especially with Ousted Onion Knight, that combination and Rigdia as well can't really deal with forwards that are dull, because after they can only deal with active forwards, so Sid Reigns gives you an option to deal with dull forwards. Not to mention it's, again, another Final Fantasy XIII character, so it helps you trigger off Sarah, and it's also searchable with Mog 13. There have been times where my opponents sort of like played a very early Tifa, like a very early 2-cost Tifa on me, and then I've just straight put down a Mog 13, search for Sid Reigns, chucked it down, blow up Tifa, discard a card from their hand, and it's gotten huge value from that. So yeah, this card's a great card, especially if your opponent does play aggressive. Next, we got 2 copies of Genesis. This card is a strong card, it's a powerful card, everyone knows it. It's 4-cost, 7,000 power. When it comes into play, dull and freeze a guy, and when it deals damage to your opponent, they discard a card from their hand. So of course, this card is strong. No one's like doubting it whatsoever. It locks your opponent's forwards down, opens them up, and it's got a constant relevant effect in the game as well. Not to mention, because we've paired it up with Ice and Lightning, you can use Red Mage to give them haste. So in a situation where your opponent may not have the like resources to respond, you can just like dull and freeze their main blocker, use Red Mage, send them in, attack through, you're dealing damage, and you're discarding card from their hand. So it's a great combination. No one really sort of like questions Ice Lightning pairing and having Genesis in the deck. Next, we got 2 copies of Armor, and again, this is a great card as well. It's great both on offense and defense. When it enters play, choose the forward your opponent controls and dull it. So again, this just really builds into the strategy of opening all your opponent's forwards up. It doesn't really matter yeah, it doesn't really matter how strong they are. If you keep them dull, they can't ever get through your guy. They can't ever block your guys. So Armon again, like sort of works into that, and also it's just got the ability to dull, choose one forward and dull it. So yeah, this is great on defense as well. So you can, if there are certain forwards that are just bigger and guys that you can't really deal with, or guys that have sort of like attack triggers, you can always use Armon to keep them down. If you need to, you can always use Red Mage to give him haste. So you can always give him the ability to like play him immediately, and then Red Mage give him haste and then dull another forward down as well. So that's another great way to use it. Not to mention there are certain cards that sort of penalize your opponent's dull forwards, cards like Zalira and cards like Mecha Chocobo, and Armon combos with those very well. Next, we have one copy of Mecha Chocobo. So this is a fun new card from this set. It's a 4-cost forward at 7,000 power, where Mecha Chocobo cannot be chosen by summons. When Mecha Chocobo attacks, choose one dull forward of cost 4 or less your opponent controls, break it. When Mecha Chocobo is blocked, break Mecha Chocobo. So this card is good for a couple of reasons, but it's also got a bit of a catch. So first of all, it can't be chosen by summons, actually quite good. People kind of like, people don't really notice that first ability because they always sort of focus on the second ability of breaking a dull forward. But that actually makes it very difficult to deal with because like a lot of the current metagame is very ability based. And so basically Mecha Chocobo can't really be being hit by summons. Basically makes it very difficult for your opponent to respond, especially if they got dull forwards. So if your opponent's ever in a situation where they've played aggressively, like and attacked aggressively, you can always just respond by using Mecha Chocobo, giving him Red Mage, hasting him in, attacking him through, and then breaking one of their dull forwards. This is particularly relevant for some of the like fire decks right now, such as Sabin, who is like obviously very good on offense, so you can't really deal with him when he's attacking, but if he's dull, you can always use Mecha Chocobo to break him, and like there's very little that your opponent can respond with it because forwards with enter play abilities can't really be done on your turn, and your opponent can't use summons to deal with him. So if you're hasting him in, then Mecha Chocobo is really difficult for your opponent to respond with. The downside is that when Mecha Chocobo is blocked, you do break Mecha Chocobo. So if your opponent has any forwards at all, then Mecha Chocobo does have that drawback, but this deck has so many ways to dull your opponent's forward. You're almost always going to be able to make it a situation where Mecha Chocobo can't be blocked by your opponent, and you're breaking your opponent's forwards every time you do it. Not to mention it is a devout target as well, so if you do need more copies of it, you can always use devout to get them back as well. Next, we have one copy of the Emperor. This current metagame is just so heavy with like abilities, especially like payment abilities, that Emperor, it just has to see play, right? So yeah, everyone knows this card. It's 4-cost 8,000 power. Whilst on the field, your opponent cannot use special ability or action abilities. So it locks a whole lot of abilities out of the game. It's a 4-cost 8,000 power, so that's very respectable stats. If you ever need more in the game, especially in certain matchups where it's very, very good, then you can always use Devout to get them back as well. So it's particularly good in the wind matchup. It's kind of relevant in the water matchup as well. As long as you have them on the field, your opponent can't really deal with it. And yeah, and if you need more copies in the game, you can always use Devout to get them back as well. And finally, to round out the list, we have one copy of Vayne. So Vayne is a card that's seen play in ice quite a lot. It's a 4-cost 8,000 power forward. Forwards of cost 5 or more your opponent controls won't activate at the controller's active phase. So basically, fives won't reactivate at their owner's active phase. When Vayne enters the field, dull all forwards of cost 5 or more your opponent controls. So basically, it's used to penalize your opponent for playing forwards of 5 costs or more. Now, in certain matchups, it's going to be more relevant, and certain matchups a little bit less relevant. So it's going to depend on your metagame, whether you run like 1 or 2 copies of this card. So that is adjustable. Of course, yeah, again, it's another card that you can grab back with Devout. And because we're running 1 copy of it, we're never going to use the special ability Force of Will to freeze all your opponent's forwards. So that effect's really not really relevant. But in general, it's just basically used to lock down your opponent's 5-cost forwards, especially if any 5-cost forwards are have any sort of really relevant abilities. He locks them down. So depending on your local metagame, if your local metagame has certain colors, so such as water because of Steiner, and potentially because of and potentially fire if they're running Edgar or Emperor Zan, then this is a potential way to lock them down as well. So so Vayne, depending on your local metagame, you may want to run more, but having 1 copy of it is always gives us the option to play him. He is a Final Fantasy 12 card, so he can be searched with Gramis. So Gramis has 2 main targets. We've got Vayne and Alcid, and so in the matchups where Vayne does become available, we can always use Gramis to search with Vayne. So those are the forwards. Now let's talk about the monsters. This one's going to be a little bit short. We got 2 Swamp Monks. So it's a 2-cost monster. Pay ice until the end of the turn. Swamp Monk also becomes a forward with 5,000 power, and when Swamp Monk attacks, choose one forward or monster, dull it. You can only use this ability once per turn. So this card is very much a more expensive version of One Cost Snow. And now One Cost Snow was a particularly relevant card for a long time because of its like super cheap cost and its ability to just like leak through your opponent's blockers. Swamp Monk is kind of a more expensive but more resilient version of it because it is 5,000 power. So the like AoE EX burst can't hit Swamp Monk. So if your opponent EX bursts like a Valor 4, like a 2-cost Valor 4, or EX bursts a Cyclops, Swamp Monk is not going to get wiped by that, whereas 1-cost Snow does. In addition to this, like the metagame right now is actually full of a lot of cards that can penalize slow. There's a lot of ice in the metagame, and they all run Sid Rain. So if you do run 1-cost Snow and you attack with it, your opponent can always use Sid Rain to break it, and you discard a card and you feel bad. If you play it and you don't have a way to haste it, like every Lightning deck's got Rydia, they're just going to play it, blow it up. Wind decks are now running Onion Knight. They can just play him irrespective of whether he's dull active, just blow him up. There are too many cards in the metagame right now that just crap on Heroic Snow, and Swamp Monk is just like a more resilient version. The fact that he's not a forward during your opponent's turn or when you don't want to use him makes it so that your opponent can't really interact with him. So he's always going to be relevant as an aggressive play for you to have. Not to mention, it's also a Final Fantasy XIII character. So if you do need a forward to trigger off Sarah's ability, Swamp Monk can be used to do that as well. And one other little thing is that when he attacks, he can choose a forward or a monster and dull it. And that's kind of another weakness that 1-cost Snow doesn't have, is that he can only dull forwards. Swamp Monk can dull monsters. So Snow may have the issue of if your opponent has one of those monsters that can turn into forward, something like a Green Dragon or a Banger Thief or a Marlboro or whatever, Swamp Monk can attack and dull those forwards, but Snow can't. Snow will attack. He has to trigger his dull. Your opponent at which point can then use their payment ability to transform their monster into a forward and block Snow. So Snow has that weakness and Swamp Monk doesn't. So yeah, Swamp Monk can dull like forwards or monsters, and sometimes that has been very handy from like in the games that we played, because like most of our forwards don't have the ability to dull other monsters. We can dull forwards easily, but yeah, Swamp Monk's one of the few ways that we can dull monsters, and yeah, it's just kind of like another out to that specific problem. Next, we got the backups. First of all, we got 3 copies of Devout. So no one's going to question this. Devout is a fantastic card, 4-cost backup that you can break at any point during your turn to put a 4-cost backup from your break zone onto the field. There's no real drawback. It's a great card. You can put this down, and then whenever you need later on, whether it's a Lightning, Snow, Genesis, whatever, this card can just bring it back out. Vayne, Emperor, yeah. It's great, especially any sort of forwards that have enter play abilities. You can use them to get those abilities to respond to your opponent's aggression as well. So it's a great card. No reason to run 2 copies, less than 2 copies of it, and 3 copies just feels right in this deck. Next, we got 3 copies of Jonabat. Now, typically a lot of ice decks run 2 copies of Jonabat because you don't want to play it early on because you're not really getting its ability to freeze 2 forwards. And this deck still kind of agrees with that, but Jonabat is a Final Fantasy XIII backup, and we want to be able to trigger off Lightning as consistently as possible, and having 3 copies of Jonabat can allow us to do that very, very consistently. It's also an EX burst, so having 3 copies of them means that sometimes you're just going to have the ability to freeze your opponent's forwards when you receive damage, and having 3 copies is fine because of its S ability Sadistic Surge, which allows you to choose one forward, dull it, and freeze it. So having 3 copies just feels right in this deck. It's a great card as a backup, as an EX burst, and additional copies have S ability. So this card is never a dead card. It's a fantastic card. It also allows us to trigger Lightning, so there's no reason not to play 3 copies of it. Next, we have 3 copies of Red Mage. So this deck has quite a few forwards that do trigger effects when they attack or when they deal damage, and Red Mage synergizes it really well. Obviously, it also combines well with any sort of forward that has any sort of like trigger abilities, so any sort of like dull or activate abilities, such as like Armon. Red Mage is a 2-cost backup. You put it in, and you've always got pressure that you can apply to your opponent by attacking with your forwards. So 3 copies just feels right in this deck. It's a great card. Next, we got 2 copies of Mog 13-2. So this is the category 13 searcher. So it's a 3-cost backup. You put it into play, and you can search for any category 13 forward. So this deck has obviously a lot because it's a Final Fantasy XIII deck. Most of the time, you will be using this to search for Legendary Lightning, Opus 4 Legendary Lightning, and the fact that like you put this backup down means that every single time like Lightning's effects are always going to be active. But there are certain times where you search for other pieces. So let's say if you got an Alcid and you need Rigdia, you can pair it up with. You can always use this Mog, or in certain situations where Sid Rains is a really quality play, such as like if your opponent's attacked with like a 2-cost haste thief, or if your opponent's attack with a 1-cost snow or something, this can search for Sid Reigns and you can get value off that. So this card like obviously fits into this deck very, very well, and that's what gives this deck a very toolboxy sort of feel, because there's a lot of different cards that are very relevant. Not to mention this card can also search for Sarah as well. So let's say if you do sort of have some board, you can always use this search for Sarah and to get a sort of Genesis-like effect. So yeah, this card's just like a great toolboxy sort of card for this deck. Next, we're running 1 copy of Gramus. So this basically is to up our Lightning backup line a little bit. And of course, yeah, when it enters play, you can search for category 12. Now there are two main targets in this deck. We got 1 copy of Vayne, and we have 3 copies of Alcid. So yeah, in those situations where you do want Alcid, you can like always use Gramus to search for it. But in those certain situations where you have a matchup where Vayne is very good, Gramus allows you to search for it every single time. So it's just one extra way one extra card that's basically a wild card to choose between Vayne or a Alcid every single time. Next, we have 1 copy of 2-cost Black Mage. So this is the Black Mage where you can break it and break one of your opponent's damage forwards. Like we talked about, it combos well with Sid Reigns, it combos well with Rigdia. Yeah, any sort of damage that your opponents had, Black Mage will allow you to just sort of finish those forwards off and allow you to like trigger those like enter break zone abilities, such as like ones that have been applied via Rigdia or Sid Reigns as well. Next, we have 1 copy of Opus 3 Black Mage. It's pay 2 Lightning, pay 2 Dull, break this Black Mage. Choose 1 active forward, cost 3 or less, break it. Now this card is on paper actually like very expensive and is very conditional, but there is pretty much a reason that we play this card. There are certain cards that are very, very difficult to deal with, and the main one is 3-cost Ash. So yeah, Ash from Opus 2. It's a water card that can just basically constantly reactivate itself and like gains power every time it's chosen by a card's ability. It's very difficult. It's very difficult for this sort of deck to sort of deal with, and this Black Mage is pretty much a card used to out that card. Some other great targets that it hits as well are Garnet, and like yeah, similar cards that have that are around the 3-cost mark that are really annoying to deal with. This Black Mage gives us an out to deal with those as well. So yeah, this card is used to deal with very specific problems, but when those specific problems do crop up, you'll be very glad that you had this card. Next, we got 1 copy of Esther Soldier. So it's a 2-cost backup. When Esther Soldier enters the field, choose on forward of cost 4 or less your opponent controls, dull it. So it's very much a tempo play. So the value of this card is, if you do have a bit of a board, and you have like say 2 or 3 forwards, and your opponent plays with a blocker, you want to be able to get through the attacker, but you may not want to like sort of commit more forwards on the build, forwards to the board, or you want to sort of build more backups. Then Esther Soldier is a great sort of like hybrid card for that. So it does allow you to build up backups while also giving you like board pressure as well. And in certain matchups, say against like Earth, for example, and you don't want to say commit like that 4 forward down. So let's say you've got like 3 forwards down, and you don't want to play like that Genesis or that Sarah or something. Esther Soldier can dull one of your opponent's forwards and allow you to attack through while also bumping up your backup line as well. And so yeah, so this card is a pretty solid card in certain situations. It's kind of just like it's a card that's situational in the sense that it allows you to have aggression, but also work on your backups as well. So it's a great sort of a hybrid card for that sort of situation. And 1 copy of Time Mage. So this Time Mage is a 2-cost Opus 3 card. Paying for free ice and dulling and breaking this backup. Choose on forward you control, remove from the game, put it back into play onto the field, dull. You can only use this ability during your turn. So this is basically the legendary Lightning ability, where you just basically pull a forward out and put it back in. Again, like it avoids any sort of, refreshes any sort of damage on them, removes any sort of buffs and debuffs, and removes any cards that are targeting them. Not to mention they also regain all their sort of enter play abilities, so like stuff like Genesis, stuff like Sarah, such as Sid Reigns, such as Rigdia, they all get to reuse their abilities because they just enter play again. So yeah, so it's a very versatile card, but it is a little bit expensive, so we're only running 1 copy of it right now. And the final Lightning backup is Seymour. It's a 4-cost backup. When it enters the field, choose on forward of cost 3 or less, break it. Yeah, this is just like a value play. So again, there are certain free cost forwards that are like kind of annoying to deal with, or you don't want to deal with combat. Seymour just gives us a way to deal with them. Think of it as like a more sort of more expensive Esther Soldier type card in that, yeah, so it comes into play, you break it forward, and you can send your forwards through. Yeah, it's also a backup, so it's got pretty good value. So yeah, that's why we're running 1 copy. Next, to sort of finish off the card by card analysis, we're talking about the summons. There's not too many go over, but here we go. So we're running 2 copies of Shiva. So this Shiva is a tempo play. Choose 2 forwards your opponent controls, dull them. So this again can be used on offense and defense. So if your opponent is in a situation where they can attack you for potentially lethal, you can use Shiva to lock down 2 of their forwards to prevent that damage. And because they're dull, you are able to attack through on the following turn as well. So this card is really, really strong. It is actually very well costed as well. The fact that it's an even cost and it's only 2 ice means that all you need to do is just pitch 1 ice card in order to trigger this off. Also, if you just like sort of if you get it as a top deck, and in certain situations, it just wins you games as well. So 3 copies, we found it's a little bit too much, but 2 copies just feels right for this deck. Next, we got 3 copies of Odin, and so yeah, so this is a card that just like choose a forward, of cost 4 or less, break it. Now, it doesn't give you, it's not like a super good value card in the sense that like, yeah, you're not getting any sort of like value because your opponent's paid like 4 or less for their forward and you're spending 4 to break it. But the reasoning for this card is that there are certain forwards that are just annoying to deal with, such as Guy, such as Luma, such as Rangers, so on and so forth, and Odin just steals them. If you're going to you're almost always going to have 2 or 3 guys on the field, and your opponents are just always going to be playing guys to try to stop you from like attacking through. And yeah, Odin just allows you to clear them through every time and just go in for 2 or 3 damage. And we're running 3 copies because we can use Legendary Lightning to search for it, and it just happens to be very good in this current meta game. And to finally finish off, we're running 2 copies of Zalera, the Death Seraph. Yeah, this card has been run in ice all throughout Opus 3 because it's such a strong card. It hits so many good numbers. So basically, it hits everything except for 1, 4, and 6, right? So basically, it doesn't hit 4s, which is the most important number to like sort of keep track of. But like 2, 3, 5, that's where like pretty much the rest of all the forwards are going to be. And Zalera breaks all those dull forwards. So so the problem that like dulling type decks have is that after you dull through your opponent's forwards, your opponent's building up a bigger board, right? So like you can dull 1 of their forwards, but next time they play another forward, you have to dull through 2 forwards. Opponent plays another guy, they have to dull through 3 forwards. It becomes progressively more and more difficult. But if you dull their forwards and then you like cast a Zalera, you can crush their entire board, allowing you to like you only have to like dull through like 1 or 2 forwards on the following turn. Yeah. So yeah, this Zalera is actually fantastic. No reason not to play it. It's also great against reactivation effects. So if your opponent is using something like a Aerith or like or Ashura or any sort of ways to reactivate the forwards, you can always use Zalera as a response to break their forwards before reactivation. And so it just works really well with this deck. And yeah, so recommendations for this deck. I've been enjoying this deck a lot. I've been playing it on stream, and it's a really, really fun deck. So I would recommend this deck if you enjoy sort of playing like aggressive fun decks. So fun as in like it's just like there's a lot of bits and pieces that you can interact with. There's a lot of tools and a lot of different plays you can play with. So yeah, it's also very aggressive. So fun in that sense, not fun as in like casual. It's very strong. I would like put it at least like tier 1.5. So it's actually like reasonably competitive as well. If you take it to your locals, you should be very fine with like playing it. Yeah, I also recommend it if you like calculating lethal setup. So there's so many ways in combination of like Time Mage with Devouts that you can set up lethal for your opponent. So if your opponent is at around 4 or 5 life, those are the situations where you can just like set up like 3 or 4 different plays and then just basically like get through the entire defense and just like hit them for damage. And this is one of the most fun parts about this deck because there's so many situations where you can just put your opponent to death if you like get the setup right. So if you like sort of working on those puzzles, then this is a really great deck, a really great fit for you. Also, if you like a balanced toolbox of cards to sort of like play in different situations, this card just has so many ways to do that. Mock Routine does allow you to search for like quite a lot of different cards for different situations. Devout also allows you to bring them back. So you're always going to have a lot of cards like available at your disposal. Yeah, so for more drawn out games, potentially something like Mecha Chocobo is good. Genesis is quite strong. Legendary Lightning is super versatile. So there's a lot of like things you can do with this deck, and it's really, really fun. And also, yeah, if you enjoy making your opponent discard cards, yeah, I would recommend you like play this deck as well. So it's a great deck. I've been having a lot of fun, and yeah, if this seems like something that you want to try out, then like definitely give it a shot. In terms of its overall stats, I would rate its power about a 6.5 out of 10. You're not going to be winning very many fights with this deck, but it does have a lot of removal and disables. So pretty much the biggest forwards that this deck's got is like Armons and Veins, and at 8,000 power. So we're not really going to be able to break through all of our opponent's forwards via combat, but this deck has pretty much every forward is just like deal damage, or a dollar dude. And so we're always going to be able to get rid of our opponent's guys and attack through, and we've got summons to get through their guys that we can't really target or we can't dull. In terms of its speed, it's an early to mid game deck, so it's not as fast as like a low curve aggro deck. Stuff that plays like Shulk. It's like a really fast early game deck. So this deck isn't as fast as that, but it's also pretty fast as well. The way I sort of like describe it is, as soon as you get the free backups, you can always threaten like a very efficient Legendary Lightning. And as soon as Legendary Lightning comes down, your opponent is on a clock. Basically, your opponent almost can't remove Legendary Lightning. Your opponent almost can't remove Legendary Lightning, so she basically puts your opponent on the clock. They have to find answers to her, and if they don't, basically they lose. So this deck does have a very quick way to just finish games off. In terms of consistency, it's about an 8.5 out of 10. So the deck is actually really consistent. Your deck has plenty of search, and having Devouts as well allow you to recover early discards. So if you are in a situation where you have to pitch certain cards in the early game, you can always use Devouts to get them back as well. So there is that sort of consistency to it as well. It's actually really quite consistent. In terms of difficulty, I would rate it medium. It's actually quite easy to learn, and it's pretty easy to play, but it offers a lot of tools for more experienced players to take advantage of. So stuff like being able to use Black Mage right, using Sid Reigns right, using Time Mage right, using Devout at right times. It gives you a lot of tools to play to make a lot of very technical plays, and so that's kind of the real fun for this deck. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to tweet them to me at GrandJason, or leave them in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond to them there. But also in addition, when I do make a deck tutorial video for this deck, I will sort of respond to some of the more common questions there as well. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any feedback or comments or questions, definitely feel free to post them. Please thumbs up and subscribe. It does help with the YouTube analytics just to make my videos show up in feeds and stuff a little bit more, so I do appreciate it if you do take the time for that. Also, I have been streaming regularly recently, and that's kind of why I haven't been sort of putting up videos, but now I'm sort of back in the process of putting up videos. I am streaming 5 days a week, so Sunday to Thursday night in these sort of times. So so if you're like London, it's 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., or if you're like East Coast, it's 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., or West Coast America, it's 2 p.m. 7 p.m. Or basically if you're Asia or Australia, then it's basically morning to midday. So my Twitch is at GrandJason. So yeah, if you want to check out me playing some of the games, ask me any questions, or have some decks you want feedback on, that's what we're doing every day, 5 days a week. So if you have the time and want to drop in, feel free to check it out. But otherwise, thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate it. GrandJ out.